the day. We have our moderator, Chairperson Dr. Satyajit Sinha, and the topic is management of complications due to delay in cataract surgery because of COVID lockdown. Very interesting topic. So I request Dr. Satyajit, sir, please take it over.
Thank you so much. Today we'll be talking on managing complications due to delay in cataract surgery due to COVID. I'm just sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so we are all aware that a lot of our OPD numbers have decreased, surgical numbers have decreased, and the patient volume has really gone down. But eventually, the kind of patients that we are dealing with, especially in cataract, they will come around, and there will be a huge load of cataract surgery in 6 months' time to 1 year's time. All the backlog will be coming. And along with it, a lot of complications will also be coming for a lot of patients who are ignorant about certain diseases that are along with the cataract, maybe most at the receiving end. I have with me Dr. Love Coach Gave today from Kolkata, Dr. Pankaj Rupalia from Kolkata, Dr. Ashu Agarwal from Delhi, Dr. Arun Chhatrapal from Ajmer, Dr. Krishna Prasad from Hubli, and Dr. Vikram Jain from Mangalore, who will be taking on different topics which will cover all the complications. Senior citizens are the ones who will be more apprehensive of visiting these hospitals. So we'll have to take extra care of all these patients. We will be covering cataracts in recurrent uveitis, cataract in uncontrolled diabetes, cataract in patients with glaucoma, all the things that are very important, cataract in surgery in patients with traumatic subluxated lenses. There'll be management of congenital cataract, delay in surgery of congenital cataract, in hypermature cataract surgeries, all the complications. Most of all, when we have an overload of patients who will be coming, we'll have to have a rationing based on visual acuity. Patients who may be one-eyed, we'll have to prioritize them when our load reaches, and the prediction is the load will be 1.5 times of what you were actually seeing 2 years back. So we have to be really prepared for the onslaught. I would now like to welcome Dr. Pankaj Rupalia, who will be speaking on cataract in recurrent uveitis. Dr. Pankaj Rupalia, please.
Please note, doctor, we have 10 minutes for speaking and 2 minutes for discussion. Thank you.
The timer says 8 minutes.
Yeah, I'll set the timer. It was set for you, actually. So I request my team to set the timer to 10 minutes, please.
Okay. Dr. Pankaj Rupalia is at Rotni Narayan Nethralaya in Kolkata, and he was a senior consultant at Shankar Nethralaya, Chennai, and then he has moved to Kolkata now. Dr. Pankaj Rupalia, please. Dr. Pankaj, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Dr. Satyajit. And I will be, without delaying any time, I'll be talking on cataract surgery in a uveitic eye. No financial disclosure. Uveitis and pandemic, Dr. Satyajit has already said, if all the patients have suffered a lot because of lockdown in reaching hospital on time, or inability of timely proper diagnosis or treatment, inadequate treatment, especially in case of patients on self-medication like recurrent uveitis, patients have got treated, but not adequately, or difficulty or misdiagnosis during online consultation, especially in the posterior uveitis. So I'll just talk about the cataract surgery in uveitis. All the patients have already suffered, but a lot of time they have lost, a lot of they have suffered, but life has to move on. So let's move on. Cataract surgery in uveitis. The clinical course management and visual outcome depends on the type of cause of uveitis, and preoperative diagnosis of the etiology and management of the uveitis is essential prognostic factor. Infectious and treatable cause of uveitis should be identified and managed before surgery. Systemic cause, it's a multi-system disease, and the systemic cause of the uveitis should be identified and controlled preoperatively. Surgical outcome, we know, depends on the different type of uveitis. Like we have a good uveitis, Fuchs, like posterior, like pars plana, we have a good surgical outcome in these cases. But juvenile rheumatoid arthritis or Behçet disease, we have a poor visual outcome. So we have to be careful about telling and informing the patient about the visual outcome after the surgery. Indication of the surgery is a little bit different in these cases than the normal cataract. Surgery is a little bit different if patient doesn't have a significant visual impairment or impaired fundus examination or photoantigenic uveitis. But if all these things are there, we have to do the surgery. There is no other option because patient is also affected. Now, preoperative assessment, most important thing is establish etiology, diagnose of the uveitis, and control the inflammatory part. Assess visual potential, very important in uveitic eye. We can do the pinhole vision, OCT, ultrasound, or potential actinometer. All these things are parameter things to assess the visual potential. Slit level examination is very important to identify the type of cataract, pupil size, posterior synechia, or pupillary membrane. We have to identify, diagnose, and then only take care of all these things. All these uveitis patients, they have a concomitant pathologies, and because of this delay in a pandemic, probably these concomitant pathologies becomes a very important. And they may have, a patient may have an uncontrolled glaucoma or maybe the optic atrophy itself. So before doing the surgery, we have to identify concomitant pathologies and treat them. Even the CME in the macula or epiretinal membrane, retinal status, vitritis, all these things are there, which is very important. And because of the delay in the treatment, this part becomes very important and the final visual outcome. Preoperatively, we know we need a quiet eye. Inflammatory cells must be eliminated, and absence of cells more important than the absence of flare. Minimum quiescent period is 3 months. It should be achieved either with a topical, periocular, systemic steroid, or maybe immunosuppressive in some cases where things are not getting controlled. Surgical options, like if we have, like any other cataract surgery, phaco with posterior segment, posterior chamber IOL, like foldable IOL is the preferred choice. And if there's no posterior segment pathology, posterior segment pathology is there, then probably we might combine the cataract surgery with the VR procedure. In some cases, even the lensectomy, where we don't decide to put the IOL, but nowadays, most of the time, most of the cases, we decide to put the IOL. So now there are some uveitis which is favorable for the IOL and some which is not favorable for IOL. Fuchs or pars plana, anti-uveitis, these are the favorable for the IOLs. And some uveitis like JRA, it's not favorable for the IOL. Even Behçet's or recurrent chronic granulomatous uveitis, where the patients are having the recurrent uveitis, they may not do very well with the IOL. So this can be the relative contraindication, but JRA is a contraindication. Most of the time, we avoid IOL in JRA if you're doing the cataract surgery. The surgical difficulty, most of the time, cataract is not very hard or very difficult in uveitic eyes. Mainly is the pupil. Pupil is the most important culprit, and we get and pupil doesn't dilate, and most of the time we have a posterior synechia, pupillary membrane or pupillary sclerosis, fragile iris, increased vascular fragility, or exuberant postoperative inflammation. So basically, pupil is the main culprit, not the cataract. So how to take care of this? So small pupil management. Small pupil management, we know we have a anatomically fixed pupil, and once we have an anatomically fixed pupil, we have a device, mechanical devices which can take care of these things. So we have iris hooks, we have a Puglin's hooks for stretching, we can stretch the iris, or we have iris rings also. And sometimes rarely we use a sphincterotomy or iridectomy, but usually it is, we don't need to cut the iris. All these pupillary devices, they can take care very well. Like we have a posterior synechia, like in this case, if we have a posterior synechia, pupil was not dilated very well, but with the moment we remove the synechia, and we can see now, pupil is fairly well dilated. And once we get this kind of pupil, there's no problem. We can just go ahead and do the cataract surgery directly, but we are not always lucky like this. Like in this case, after removing the synechia, also we didn't have an adequate size of the pupil. So here, what we did, we just used the Puglin's hooks. Basically, it's a 4-point stretching. Don't try to overstretch the iris. So patient should not have a like mid-dilated pupil or have a symptoms in post-operative period. So if you have this kind of moderately dilated pupil and cataracts are not very difficult cataracts, we can do the cataract surgery without any problem. By any chance, if we are not able to do the like if we don't get the adequate size of the pupil, if pupil is coming down in between, we can use the irisus or pupillary expander. There are sometimes the iris membrane or fibrous bands are there. So if we have a fibrous band, like in this case, we try to remove the synechia, and after that I try to remove the fibrous membrane. And once I thoroughly remove the fibrous band, put the viscoelastic, then people was relatively dilated, mid-dilated, and I could finish the surgery. But if by any chance, if we don't get the adequate, we can use the hooks and other methods. There's no problem in that. Now the IOL. See, cataract is not a very difficult thing. Most of the time, it's a soft cataract is there. But IOL is very important. We should always put the IOL in the back. Avoid sulcus implantation or AC IOL or SF IOL, iris claw lenses in these cases. And IOL design and material, previously we used to use the heparin sulfate modified lenses, but now the choice is we use only hydrophobic acrylic IOL. And in the bag, hydrophobic acrylic IOL, they do very well. Sometimes after putting the IOL in the bag, if you don't have the adequate size of the pupil and if you feel posterior segment pathology is there, we can just give the small nick in and do the sector iridotomy. I usually prefer in the infero-nasal quadrant to do the sector iridotomy. And then if posterior segment pathology is there, can combine with the steroid IVT also. So post-operative inflammation is very important. To control the inflammation, we have a steroid. During the surgery, we give conjunctival decadron and atropine in all the cases, or even some cases where it is required, the posterior subtenon Tricot, or even IVT if it's required. So steroid is the mainstay. And after the surgery, we use intensive topicals and cycloplegics during the initial course of the disease. Systemic steroid, if required, if we feel the inflammation is very high, then we can use the systemic steroid also short term. And NSAIDs. NSAIDs are very important in these cases, and we should use the NSAID for the long term to avoid the recurrent uveitis. Anti-glaucoma medication, most of the time these cases require anti-glaucoma medication. So we use judicial anti-glaucoma medication in these cases. To conclude, uveitis and cataract surgery, it's challenging. If we do the proper preoperative assessment, control of inflammation, meticulous surgery, lead to satisfactory visual outcome. That's what the conclusion is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pankaj. That was such an extensive, brilliantly presented. It has covered everything. Dr. Ashu? Dr. Ashu, you're there? Okay, Arun, I can ask you a question in regard to this paper on uveitis. I just wanted to ask, sometimes there's a dilemma. These patients who, like Dr. Pankaj was saying, sometimes we should give steroids. We have to give steroids to control the uveitis. But coming to your paper only, some of these patients have diabetes, and it becomes quite a catch-22 situation that they have these diabetes and they have not seen a diabetologist for the last 1.5 years, and they will be coming with uncontrolled diabetes, and they are having this uveitis also. So what are your thoughts on it?
You want me to answer, or Dr. Pankaj?
No, you answer, no problem.
No.
It's okay. Please.
Okay. What I feel is that most of the cases, they'll be the inflammation is controlled with the topical steroids or with subtenons or posterior subtenons steroid. You don't need to give systemic steroids in many of such cases. So really, systemic steroids are not required. Yes, if there is need for systemic steroids, then of course diabetes need to be controlled meticulously, very carefully under the supervision of a physician. You need a physician to control the diabetes. Dr. Pankaj, you like to add on this?
Yeah, no. I 100% agree with that. Basically, we avoid systemic steroid. And if we have to give the systemic steroid, we have to give the short course of the systemic steroid. And rest of the things, like posterior subtenons steroid can take care, Tricot can take care, because it it's intensive topical steroid. Even I prefer to give the IVT quite a bit nowadays if you have posterior segment pathology is there, and avoid the systemic steroid in these cases. Because if the patient is having diabetes, So diabetes and steroid is a very tricky situation. Even after the COVID, we are seeing a lot of patients because of the steroid, like diabetes is increasing. Yeah, please, Dr. Arun.
I have one question for you. You said that you require a question period of at least 3 months before you operate, right? Yes. Now the patient is quiet, the eye is quiet, there's no cell, there's no flare, nothing. Would you still like to start topical steroid and NSAIDs before the surgery? And if yes, how long before surgery you would like to start with steroid and NSAIDs?
See, basically, if eye is quiet, this doesn't make any difference. The day we see the patient and decide about the surgery, we start the topical steroid. If 5 days is enough, that's no problem. But even 3 days also, if patients are able to use the steroid pre-operative, the moment we start the antibiotic, with that we start the steroid simultaneously in these patients. Like in a routine cataract, we don't start the steroid before that. Here with the antibiotic, we start the steroid also. That's what my little bit different from the normal patients.
Thank you, Dr. Pankaj, for that wonderful presentation. We'll move on to the next presentation, which will be by Dr. Arun Kshatrapal from Ajmer. He will be speaking on cataract surgery in uncontrolled diabetes.
Just full screen slideshow. Just a minute, please. Yeah.
So, Satyajit, I'm next or what?
Okay.
Next is Krishna Prasad.
Yes, Dr. Kshatrapal, we can see your PPT. Okay.
I'll be talking about cataract surgery in uncontrolled diabetes. Why I'm not able to move my slides? Yes. We know that there are about 62 million diabetic patients in India, and the prevalence being 9% in the urban population and 3% in the rural population. We all know that the diabetes is a group of metabolic disease which is characterized by hyperglycemia resulting from the defects in insulin secretion and action, or both. And it is associated with long-term damage or dysfunction and failure of eyes, kidneys, nerves, heart, and blood vessels. So what is the criteria for diagnosis of diabetes by WHO? WHO says that the fasting plasma glucose is more than 126 milligram per deciliter or 100 ml is labeled, the patient is labeled as diabetes. Or if the casual plasma glucose, or what we call as the random blood glucose sample, is more than 200 milligram, then the patient can be labeled as diabetic. Or there is the 2-hour post ingestion of 75 grams of glucose in water, and the plasma glucose is more than 200 milligram after 2 hours of ingestion, then the patient is labeled as diabetic. Now there's a gray zone in between a normal person and a diabetic patient. The patient may have an impaired fasting glucose. That means that the fasting glucose is plasma glucose is between 100 to 125 milligram, then the patient is labeled as impaired fasting glucose. Or the patient may have an impaired glucose tolerance when the post 2 hours plasma glucose is between 140 to 199 milligram. So this is about the terminology. Now, diabetes and COVID. There has been an increased incidence of diabetes in this COVID era. COVID-19 itself may cause diabetes. The mechanism of COVID-19 diabetes is still under study. There have been unregulated and unmonitored use of steroids during this era of COVID. Stress and sedentary lifestyle during the lockdown has resulted in an increased incidence of diabetes. Not only increased incidence of diabetes, but increase in the uncontrol of diabetes in the previously controlled patients. And of course, due to the non-follow-up of diabetic patients with their treating physician has led to uncontrol of diabetes in a previously diagnosed patient who were previously controlled. Cataracts are amongst the earliest complication of diabetes mellitus, and the patients with diabetes mellitus are 2 to 5 times more likely to develop cataracts, especially when there is uncontrolled diabetes. And risk may reach 15 to 25 times in diabetes less than 40 years of age. And impaired fasting glucose has been considered as a risk factor for development of cortical cataracts. Cataract surgery if you perform a surgery in an uncontrolled diabetic, there's an increased risk of post-operative complications, and inflammation is more in uncontrolled diabetics. There's a delayed wound healing, the chances of infections and endophthalmitis is more, and there's a progression of existent retinopathy in such patients. So the management of a case of uncontrolled diabetes with cataract will basically depend on what is the status of the patient's cataract and what is the status of the retinopathy. If there's a mature cataract or there's an immature cataract, the management will depend on that. And of course, what is the status with the cataract? The patient is, whether the patient is having a maculopathy or is having a non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy or a diabetic retinopathy, or there's a no retinopathy at all in patients with diabetes and cataract. So the management will basically depend on that. So let's come to each of them one by one. So in a patient with uncontrolled diabetes and mature cataract, where there's no view of fundus, where you don't know that what is the condition behind, what is the condition of the retina, you can get a fair amount of assessment of the condition by looking at the other eye of the patient if the view of the fundus is available in the other eye. Usually the diabetic retinopathy is equal in both the eyes, but it can be unequal as well. So you have to keep your prognosis guarded. You have to give a guarded prognosis to the patient before you take up such patient. And of course, there is urgency for the control of diabetic patients, especially when once you see an intumescent cataract, the patient can go into a lens-induced glaucoma, or there's a hypermature Morganian cataract, the patient can go into a phacolytic glaucoma. So there is an urgency in such cases for the control of diabetes. Then there can be uncontrolled diabetes with immature cataract, where you have a view of the fundus. So depending on the retinopathy, whether the patient has a retinopathy or doesn't have a retinopathy, then it becomes slightly easy for the surgeon, and there is no urgency for the surgery, and there's no urgency to control the diabetes. What I'm talking about, I'll just let you know why there's an urgency or non-urgency of control of diabetes. So what happens if you control the diabetes rapidly? There are certain demerits of rapid glycemic control. If the diabetes is controlled rapidly, there's a progression of retinopathy and there's a worsening of a macular edema. So it is always advisable to achieve a gradual glycemic control in a patient of an uncontrolled diabetic status. So what usually is suggested that the patient, the glycosylated hemoglobin should come down by about 0.5% every month and not more than that. Suppose the glycosylated hemoglobin of the patient is say around 11%, so it should be gradually decreased to 10 or less than 10 before you take the patient to the surgery, and not rapidly, because rapid decrease in the blood sugar level or the rapid glycemic control can lead to progression of retinopathy and worsening of the macular edema. So for me, what is a good glycemic control? If the patient has a 2-hour post glucose, plasma glucose less than 200 milligram deciliter, then I'll go ahead with the surgery. And at the same time, the glycosylated hemoglobin should be less than 10%. So it should be below 10%, and the plasma glucose should be less than 200 milligram. If it is above 200 milligram, it's somewhere about 230, 240. Wait till the patient comes down. And if the glycosylated hemoglobin is around 9%, then even you can go ahead and operate even at 210, 220 also. But prefer to bring down the blood glucose level to less than 200 milligram per deciliter. What are the advantages of good glycemic control? There's a less risk of postoperative surgical complication. The episodes of hyper and hypoglycemia post-surgery are less. The wound healing is good. There are less chances of infection, and there's a less risk of severe postoperative inflammation. And there's a decreased occurrence of, if there's no retinopathy, there's decreased chances of occurrence of retinopathy, or the progression of retinopathy is decreased. Before you go ahead with the surgery, you go ahead with the routine examination of visual acuity, look, slit lamp gonioscopy, tonometry, and dilated fundus examination is very important. You do a dilated fundus examination to, if possible, record the status of the retina. If it is possible, perform angiography and OCT. OCT will give you a fair amount of idea if there's a macular edema or not. The idea of doing an angiography before the surgery is to give you the status of the macula, whether the macula is ischemic or well perfused, because a flat retina can be ischemic, and the ischemia that will give you, you can tell the patient that the visual recovery will be less. And if the fundus is not visible, you can do a B scan. And of course, if you have a VR friend with you, just ask a VR friend to have a look at the retina of the patient before you go ahead with the surgery. Preoperative considerations: the PDR is likely to progress rapidly after the cataract surgery. So if required, PRP is recommended preoperatively. If it is not possible to do preoperatively, then it should be performed in the immediate post-operative period, maybe within a week or 10 days after the surgery. And when the media is hostile for PRP, you can think of doing some cryopexy at the equator, or you can ask your vitreoretinal friend to combine with vitrectomy and do an endolaser in one sitting. If there is a pre-existing diabetic maculopathy, it may progress post-operatively. Macular edema must be treated adequately before you go ahead with the cataract surgery. You may plan to give intravitreal anti-VEGF before the surgery, or you may give it at the time of the surgery itself, along with the cataract extraction, and it is usually associated with poor visual outcome. Phacoemulsification is the procedure of choice in such patients because it causes less inflammation and it gives you a better visual results. And during the surgery, you must also keep in mind that there may be corneal hyposthesia. So you need to protect the corneal epithelium because they are slow to heal and recurrent corneal erosions can occur. Non-dilating pupil, Dr. Pankaj had just mentioned about these. You can use intracameral drugs. Sphincterectomies and pupil stretching techniques have been just talked about, and pupil expanders. I'm not going again into this. Capsulorhexis, it should be larger than the normal, but not large enough. It should have IOL all around, and there should be good cortical cleanup because you need to have a look at the fundus after the surgery. So that should be a good cortical cleanup. IOL should be 6 mm in size. It should facilitate peripheral fundus examination. Preferred material is hydrophobic and square edge. Visual prognosis after cataract surgery. If there's little or no retinopathy, the visual outcome is good. If there's a significant retinopathy or CSME, there will be a poor visual outcome. ETADRS report number 25 says that, that there's an accelerated retinopathy progression in the operated eyes, but they may not be statistically significant. Cataract surgery and macular edema. If there's no macular edema before the cataract surgery, there is no difference in prevalence of macular edema after the surgery. But if there is a pre-existing macular edema, post-operative, there will be a deterioration in the macular edema.
Dr. Gentle remind for the time.
Good glycemic control is desired before cataract surgery. Avoid rapid glycemic control. Outcome may not be the same as in the case of non-diabetic patients, so you make the patient aware of such case. And new surgical and pharmacological therapies allows for safer and more effective surgery, and special attention should be given to the systemic and ocular conditions of the patient. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Dr. Arun. You have covered everything in detail. The attendees will benefit a lot. There was just one thing I wanted to add in this is that in diabetics, we have seen a higher incidence of dry eye disease. And these patients who are going to undergo surgery will also need to be evaluated for dry eye. And they are also, these diabetics are also more prone to epithelial defects. And we have to go on bombarding them with eye drops post-surgery.
Lubricating drops are...
Correct. So one thing which needs to be kept in mind is the lubricating drops. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much.
I would like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Krishna Prasad from Hubli. who will be speaking on cataract surgery in patients with glaucoma.
So thank you very much, Dr. Satyajit, and to all the panelists here. I think this is a very timely and a very, very apt topic for this year's conference, because we have seen two COVID waves, one after the other, and probably many more to come. So I think glaucoma is probably already a problematic thing, and along with the COVID situation, it's a double whammy. So actually glaucoma is as such a sight-threatening problem. It requires a very constant follow-up, a very good compliance, and very importantly, we need to take the timely decision when the patient comes, whether it's medication, many more medications, or a surgery, or a combination. So we need to really have the patient on time every time. So this COVID has disrupted this coordination, and this has created a great deal of problems. I think when you ask these patients of glaucoma who come with really exacerbated problems, the phobia, the old people do not come out, they don't even walk. I mean, they don't even go out of the house. And very importantly, logistics. There's no conveyance to come. The buses are not working. The private things are not happening. And many a time the caretakers are busy in other more important things. There's already a priorities. They have their own problems. There are, the commerce has been hit very badly. So there are many things that really puts a glaucoma treatment as a last priority when there's an existential crisis like COVID. I think that is very important. What are the things that you normally see in these situations? The patients develop lens-induced glaucoma. You have seen many, the previous speakers also have alluded to this. The cataract matures, hypermatures, become intumescent, develops lens-induced glaucoma, both phacomorphic, phacolytic, and other varieties, most often phacomorphic. And the second thing is the patient normally are not able to buy access glaucoma drugs, or not able to buy it for various reasons. So the glaucoma really becomes uncontrolled. They lose vision and very short time, especially very bad glaucomas like pseudoexfoliation glaucomas and high pressure glaucomas really go out of control. And there are many patients of the posterior segment pathology like central retinal vein occlusions, proliferative diabetic retinopathy. The diabetes is a scourge again, as told by Dr. Arun Kshetrapal. An ocular ischemic syndrome patient, they develop NVG, neovascular glaucoma. They don't even come to the hospital and stay there. And many of them in this last 6 or 8 months or 1 year, there are many patients who they appear in the horizon of glaucoma patients. They don't get treatment at all. So these are the things which really, add to our kitty. I just want to start with a patient who came with a cataract lasting for more than a year, did not come, but he came with a raised IOP of 40 within 3 days. Luckily, we could control it was a phacomorphic glaucoma to start with. So with the early inflammation and just an initial rise in the intraocular pressure, we could, control the pressures. And in this case, we decided just to remove the cataract, because this is one rare situation where the phacomorphic glaucoma patient has come early. We have managed to control the intraocular pressure and the inflammation. Well, the pupil doesn't dilate well, but nevertheless, this swollen lens had to be taken off. And whenever we do this procedure, we can also probably do an additional goniosynechrolysis, or even with a viscogoniosynecholysis. Just try to put in a good quality viscoelastic at the angle so that whatever little peripheral anterior seneca which is beginning to form kind of opens it up. I have a surgical gonioscope where I do it under supervision. Well, this is a cataract which are really hardened. It's a small pupil. Maybe I'm just taking my calculated risks. Maybe it's worthwhile to probably put in a pupil expander. We can put a ring or a hook so that you get a better idea. If the patient is diabetic, and if you want to really do a large rexis, as Dr. Arun Kshetrapal said, maybe it's a good idea to put some pupil expansion devices. So the hard cataract, we are trying to make it into smaller pieces, and this pupil is the problem here. So otherwise, we'll be able to kind of do it in much more convenience. So with this, we'll be able to mobilize each piece, cataract which is really hardened due to the COVID delay. And finally, we'll be able to take care of this. So once we remove the cataract, as I said, we're kind of to open up the angle, especially the peripheral anterior chamber has to be opened up with a good quality viscoelastic before IA, so that it kind of tries to make up for whatever the peripheral anterior synechia. In the post-operative, IOP spike can be taken care of. But nevertheless, this patient will have an IOP spikes because we have not added a glaucoma surgery to this, and it would take several days for it to normalize, the intraocular pressure to normalize. So a second patient is a classical nightmarish phacomorphic glaucoma. Patient comes with all the symptoms of headache, nausea, pain. The pain is so severe that the patient has to be dragged on, has to come to us. And many a times, the surgery has been already more than 10 days so that we decide to actually do a surgery of a combined phacotrabeculectomy. So I'm doing a rectangular flap. And now this surgery, so I'm just doing a flap, and normally I do a single port procedure where under the same rectangular flap, I open the clear corneal incision so that, and you can see that typical swollen lens, and getting a rhexis is also a problem here. So I'm just getting through the clear cornea with the thing and trying to aspirate the center. So without bending the needle, I'm going there inside and trying to suck and trying to decompress and take away the intralenticular pressure. Once we do that, we're going to put some viscoat there and use the side port. And luckily we have very good fine instruments, titanium instrument, by which we can probably do a small rhexis. So getting a rhexis, especially if you are planning for a phacoemulsification, is very important. And once you do a small rhexis, you can decompress the lens. So I'm doing an IA, trying to decompress the lens and take away the swollen cortex so that it goes down. I can flatten the anterior capsule in a much better way, and trying to nick it up and give a nick and do a secondary rhexis. So this, makes the job of getting a rhexis much easier and preventing the peripheral straight tears or a rhexis runoff. And especially in a swollen lens like this, it can really go to the posterior capsule. But this whole nucleus has been really waterlogged, and many a times it is much easier because they are very brittle lenses and they break very easily, and the removing the cataract may not be a very difficult thing with a good phacoemulsification machine. So once you do that, you complete your trabeculectomy and put an intraocular lens and complete your trabeculectomy. But at the same time, there are a lot of friends from our vitreoretina department also put a lot of silicone oil, and in fact, the retina department in any multi-speciality eye hospital keep the glaucoma surgeons busy. When they put the oil, and there is a silicone oil removal that is probably envisaged, the patient never comes back. And that leads to silicone oil induced glaucoma and also cataract at times. Now you can see this was a case of rhegmatogenous RD with a VR surgery at the silicone oil and has been left for a long time. You can see the silicone oil emulsified in the eye and high pressure, as well as you can see the inflammation and cataract. So this needs to be taken care. So we are planning to do again a phacotrabeculectomy. So open it up, and now you can see that all the silicone oil globules are taken out, and there is a posterior synechia which needs to be removed. And this lens luckily is a much softer lens, and without any pupillary expansion devices, with the release of the posterior synechia, we are able to get a big enough here getting the rhexis size also very adequate is important, because the patient has a posterior segment problem. We cannot have a small rhexis in this case. It's a soft cataract, and getting rid of the cataract is much easier now. And this is where we continue to do the trabeculectomy. So we do a trabeculectomy and do a peripheral iridectomy and then complete the surgery. So these are the completion of the single port or a single port phacotrabeculectomy. So that is the releasable, that is the adjustable suture that I normally put, and this is how it is. So, but many a times the closure of the trabeculectomy, whether you are doing for a patient who has come delayed for a cataract, for a glaucoma surgery, or because of a lens-induced glaucoma complication. So we need to see that many of them, because of the inflammation, the chances of failure are high, especially if the patient also has a treated NVG. So you need to kind of use your suturing techniques to your advantage. These are the adjustable sutures. I don't complete the suture. This is a flip. I mean, so these sutures hold the thing. If at all in the immediate post-op period, you can actually try to rub this area, manipulate this area with a cotton tip applicator so that one of these sutures try to loosen up, and with giving post-operative subconjunctival mitomycin or 5-fluorouracil, you can actually try to manage these blebs so that they don't fail. So instead of having a releasable suture in which the suture comes out through the cornea, many a times after pulling, they may not really open up. This is a much safer technique, much easier. You can take multiple adjustable sutures and try to do it. Okay, so with this, so it's a very costly thing for the patients, this delay in presentation. And obviously it's a needless blindness and a needless expenditure for the patient. And many a times the patients are not to be blamed because of this particular pandemic situation. And I think with the future lockdowns, we don't know how many waves and how these things are going to affect. We need to kind of have a preparedness, especially with patients of glaucoma. Try to tell them, preempt them, try to get ready, and try to use a teleconsultation media or any kind of communication to these patients so that we avoid such problems in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Krishna Prasad. I think one of the key words is teleconsultation because these patients are not turning up. But what beautiful videos you have shown. Very nice. Just I had one question in case number 2 where you were showing hypermature cataract and trap were combined. Obviously, the angle would also be compromised. Would you want to do it in 2 settings, or after you have removed the hypermature cataract and reassess the intraocular pressure, or you would still want to do it in the same setting?
No. The thing is a hypermature cataract with, Morgagnian cataract with phacolytic glaucoma. Normally, there is no structural damage to the angle, but it was a very prolonged one. They say for weeks together, phacolytic glaucoma, sometimes they stay and they come back. In such situation, because of the long-standing, blocking or what you call the clogging of the trabecular musculature, the post-operative IOP spike is much more prolonged and protracted. In such situation, maybe it is better to do a trabeculectomy along with that. For a fresh phacolytic glaucoma with a hypermature cataract, just a cataract surgery is good enough. You'll be able to bring back the IOP in very few days, within few days of the post-operative period. But a phacomorphic glaucoma, long-standing more than 1 week, you have to do a combined procedure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your beautiful presentation. We'd like to move on to the next speaker now, Dr. Ashu Agarwal from Delhi, who will be speaking on management of long-standing post-traumatic subluxated cataract. Dr. Ashu Agarwal, please.
Thank you, Satyajit, for giving me this opportunity. And hello, everyone. I'll start my screen sharing. Yeah. Okay. Is it visible?
Yes. Can you make take it?
Just a second. I'm not timer is missing. So anyway. So okay. So today I'll be talking about management of long-standing post-traumatic subluxated cataracts. I have no financial interest in any of the procedures, techniques, or devices used. So as we all know, subluxated cataract is probably the only type of cataract that still poses a challenge to the experienced phacosurgeon. How are the post-traumatic subluxated cataracts different? Often, these are younger patients, but not invariably. The remaining unaffected zonules are strong, with no weakness or laxity of remaining zonules. The anterior vitreous hyaloid phase is usually stable unless it's a penetrating injury. Surgery is therefore more comfortable and relatively safer, and we can get away with minimal capsular support devices than usual. Capsular integrity, however, may be compromised, and we have to be careful about that. So what are the capsule supports? It could be internal or external, and this is how it evolved also. The internal supports were the capsular tension rings, followed by Sionese rings, which came in, and then capsule segments. External supports were by iris hooks, and followed by the dedicated capsular support systems, commonly known as capsular hooks. So if you look at the iris hooks versus capsular hooks, you see the differences. The iris hooks have a shorter return, and it's more angulated compared to the capsule hooks. The return is longer, and it's at the plane of the capsule. Because of this shorter return and because of this angulation, when it's applied to the capsule rhexis edge, it may cause a tenting, and sometimes if the quality is not good, it may also cause a tearing. And moreover, the capsule fornix is not supported as in capsule hooks. So the advantages of capsular hooks are that it supports both the rhexis edge as well as the capsule fornix. Capsular tension rings were the first ones to come out for such devices. They're very economical, very effective, and a very simple mechanism of circumferential expansile forces. And they enhance IOL centration, but they have their certain limitations that sometimes the cortex can get entrapped. Sionese rings were designed for scleral fixation along with the suture, essentially a CTR ring with a hook and an eyelet at here, so that it can be fixated to the sclera. They essentially modified CTRs with a distal eyelet on a fixation hook 0.25 mm above the plane of the ring, and suture to the sclera provides additional stability used in more significant subluxations. Then came the capsule segments, which are essentially truncated Sionese rings. If you could imagine this arc going further down, it would be a Sionese ring. So it's basically been truncated. And they're partial ring segments with a fixation hook for temporary or permanent fixation, with one or more segments can be used in a surgery. And the placement advantage is that placements are, and removal is quite easy and atraumatic, and stripping of cortex out is also very easy. So comparing CTR with Sionese, Sionese provides all the benefits of a CTR ring, and in addition, it provides enhanced stability. But the downside is that it's technically more difficult. There's a learning curve, steep learning curve. And CTR is good for 2 to 3 clock hours. Anything more, you should provide a scleral fixation, because otherwise the zonules may dehisce with time. There is an unzipping effect with IOL tilt and decentration, and sometimes the IOL and back complex can even fall in the vitreous. We're comparing Sionese ring with capsule segments. Well, Sionese, if anyone who's done a Sionese ring implantation knows how difficult and flimsy they can be. It's a very flimsy structure. The ring itself with 2 strands of 9O or 10O proline sutures there, confusing everything, and surgery can be quite tricky. Segments, on the other hand, are smaller and easier to handle. And the ring, though, has an advantage of circular expansion of the back, but this can be offset by additional CTI implantation along with the capsule segments if required. Surgical technique, I think I'll just go quickly over it. Basically, important thing is do a viscoat layering in the area of zonular dialysis to prevent admixture of the irrigating fluid with the vitreous. And capsulotomy should be done such that the rhexis edge is maintained with respect to the lens diameter and not the pupil. Otherwise, you'll have an eccentric one. It appears eccentric, but it's then central and should be about 5 millimeters. The capsule hooks should be placed through relatively vertical incisions. They should not be too beveled like the ones we use for iris hooks. And the placement is at 90-degree intervals for diffuse zonal laxity and 45 degrees for absence of zonules in a region. And do not tighten the hooks, just a slight tug is required. The hydro procedure should be gentle, and nucleus management should be by slow motion phaco with no dialing of nucleus. And the CTR, Sionese and capsule segments are usually implanted after nucleus removal, or the CTR may, although the CTR may be placed prior to nucleus removal. Irrigation aspiration is done with the support systems in place, and IOL implantation is done with no minimum dialing. I'll show a video of CTR injection. This is a very old video, I think dated to 2000, the year 2000. And this was a traumatic cataract patient, was in mid-20s, large zonular dialysis area. I'm sorry about the quality because this was recorded in 2000 on a VHS and converted at that time itself. And the idea of including this video was that in today's day and age, I would never do it. This amount of subluxation and just getting away with a CTR implantation, I would never even dream of it. But at that time, there was nothing else available. CTR, in fact, this surgery was supposed to be cutting edge at that point of time. This is an indigenous designed CTR injector that we designed and still available and works very well.
Video is not moving.
It's not moving?
We can only see the hourglass.
The hyperlink will not work in Zoom.
Hyperlink will not work?
No. You can go to the next slide.
Just a second. Then let me just, I'll have to take it manually then. Is this working?
No.
No.
Can you see this?
No.
No, but this is direct.
No, that also will not
You
work.
have to stop sharing your screen and then you'll have to.
No, that also will not work, Dr. Satyajit.
So how do you show a video then?
Then you have to embed in the slide only.
Okay. So because these are hyperlinked. So let me just try and embed then if possible. And maybe I'll come back. Is that okay, Satyajit?
I think we can show it at the end. We can show that video in the end.
Okay.
You wanted to go to the next slide or something? You want to complete your topic?
So I'll just complete. If time permits, we can show the video. Otherwise, no point continuing with this. No. So anyway, so I'll complete the presentation. So this there was a video of a CTA injection. This is how it was.
You'll have to share your screen again.
These, this video was that to show that. Okay, sorry.
Here again.
Yeah. Is it visible now?
Yes.
So the idea of including this video and the next one with a CTR along with iris hooks, which was again a similar period, was they were all traumatic cataracts, was to show that zonular dialysis, despite the zonular dialysis, the remaining zonules were strong in younger patients of trauma. This next video was of Sioni rings along with capsule hooks and post-op day picture, and then the CTS and a combination of CTS capsule segment, that is, along with capsule hooks. So in conclusion, traumatic subluxate cataracts, although challenging, can be dealt with effectively by careful planning and optimal use of capsular support devices. One should be familiar with surgical principles for subluxated cataract and the use of all capsule support devices. Successful outcome in such trauma cases can be life-altering for the patient and immensely gratifying for the surgeon. Thank you for a patient hearing. Now, Satyajit, do you want me to come back with the...
Yes. We will have time for that. So okay, you can embed your video in the presentation.
Okay, right.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
We'd like to move on to the next speaker. Dr. Love Kochgave from BBI Foundation, Kolkata. He will be speaking on management of complications arising out of delay in congenital cataract surgery. Dr. Love Kochgave, please.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes. You can make it full screen.
So I was quite puzzled when Dr. Satyajit showed me this topic 2 weeks back, and suddenly preparing for complications arising to the COVID, but finally I managed, and all the surgeries, what is being shown are actual complications of delay in pediatric cataract surgery. And the most importantly, the issues that we faced was delayed surgery, delay resurgery, and leading to dense stimulus deprivation amblyopia. And as we are all aware that delay in pediatric cataract surgery leads to a permanent vision loss, and the more every day we are delaying, it is leading to some permanent damage. And here we are talking of a situation in which surgeries got delayed for months together. And then I went back to my library and saw what all damage was done during this period. And many of the patients came with loose sutures because most of the pediatric cataract surgeries have suture in the main port, and that leading to infection and local inflammation. Complications like visual axis opacification after the surgery. Many of these children require resurgery, and visual axis opacification after the surgery was missed for months together, and that led to the stimulus deprivation amblyopia. Second eye surgery was delayed. One eye has got operated, other eye not operated. One case needed pupilloplasty due to post-op inflammation. That got delayed. And definitely the amblyopia treatment got delayed in many of them who were operated, and the parents were not. Good thing is that many of them contacted us and asked us that patching was going on, what should we do? We are not able to come. So those parents could be directed and advised properly that you continue the patching, and whenever you can come, please come. But a large proportion of those didn't contact us and stopped patching in between. And that led us going maybe 5 steps backwards after moving 1 or 2 steps forward. Now, let's come to some of the things. And another thing what changed in pediatric cataract surgery was the way we started giving our general anesthesia. First, as soon as we started in last year, May, our anesthetists became very panicky about giving general anesthesia due to risk of aerosols. So this is a box which we ordered, and it came in 3 different sizes. So during intubation, the child was kept under this box. The OT doors were kept open. A fan was kept on the door, moving the OT air outside. And that gave her a confidence. And then we restarted the surgery. And then the cases started pouring in, and another important was COVID testing before general anesthesia. That is another important point we had to take care of. And luckily, we have been doing for last 1.5 years, and till now, no infection to the OT staff has been there. Now, this was a case in which initial corneal repair was done, and then the patient got trapped in the lockdown and for months was lost to follow up. And what you see, all loose cornea and sutures, and that has led to panners. All blood vessels have come inside the cornea. And especially in this area, on careful examination, there were blood vessels in the cornea. So what we did a peritomy, and the feeder blood vessels we cauterized there, hoping that later on the pannus will shrink and not lead to further damage. And then the cataract surgery was done. And as you can see, there is the intracameral dilating agent has been given. Now you have got a decent size dilatation. Capsulorhexis is done, and in traumatic cataracts we have to be careful because of poor visualization. Many times we are not able to do proper capsulorhexis, but luckily in this case we were able to achieve. Another thing is that in long-standing cataracts is the fibrosis of the anterior capsule. That is another problem we face. And as you can see here, we avoided the fibrosed area and completed the rhexis. And then the cortical aspiration is done. And IOL implanted in the bag. And after this has been done, we do vitrectomy access for posterior capsulotomy in all of our cases. And if visualization is poor, it is much more easier to do. And advantage is that all the lens, all the IOL is in the bag if we are doing this procedure. And finally, the ports were hydrated. So we go to the next situation. This is another case in which the child had trauma and came to us months later. And by this time, it was a blunt trauma. The anterior capsule has got fibrosed. So initial capsulorhexis was attempted. And as you can see, you can go only till one point. Beyond that, the capsulorhexis will not progress. But in children, we have to aim for IOL implantation in the bag. So what we did, we stopped at the point where it touched the fibrosed area and then went in with a cutter. And with the cutter, the fibrosed area cuts quite well. And with the high-speed 23 gauge vitrectomy cutter, the capsule can capsulorhexis, vitrector-assisted capsulorhexis can be very smooth. And as you can see, even in the non-fibrosed area, we have used the cutter to enlarge the rhexis size. And at the end, it will be a good round rhexis only. And with the one thing we have to be careful while implanting the IOL, it should not stretch the rhexis margin too much because chances of extension will be there. And very trimming the fibrosed area, and now we get almost a 5 millimeter or 5.5 millimeter size rhexis. The cortical aspiration was done, and good visual access, red glow is there, as you can see now. IOL implanted in the bag. And over the years, I've switched mainly to 3-piece IOL in children because, again, this IOL, over the years, maybe 10 years, 15 years down the line also, it will be as clear as it is now. So this has become my first choice of IOL in children. And this is what you see at the end of the surgery. Now coming to the next thing, this was a child again after the initial surgery lost, and as you can see, the main port was suturing that got all inflamed. The anterior segment inflammation led to pupil get obliterating, and these are the cases which eventually end up with a very dense amblyopia. But again, we have to salvage the situation at this stage also. And initially we tried using the cutter to make a good size pupil. But again, it is sucking but not cutting very well. And then we use Sinskey hook, and now you can see the visual axis is more or less formed and clear. And these are the main problems as a pediatric ophthalmologist, what we faced in children, and the resurgery rate increased because they were not following up properly with us. And now you can see a very good decent size axis, and visual axis is generally clear, so we need not do anything.
6:30.
More importantly, these strands from the iris have to be removed, because again, this will lead to posterior synechia, and then again, the pupil may get obliterated. So that is why we try to remove those strands. And again, you can see pigmented iris tissue here. So if you remove all, chances of again recurrent inflammation will be much less. And this is the end of the procedure. Thank you, Dr. Satyajit. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Love, for that wonderful presentation. I think one of the our segment of patients who will be affected most are children, because they will not be able to complain to the parents. Parents are not able to travel to the hospitals. And you will be seeing a lot of these, all of us will be seeing a lot of these complicated cases. Dr. Krishna Prasad, you would like to give some points on this topic?
I think, as I told you, just like glaucoma, even pediatric problems are again a double whammy. We have, as such, parents coming late, even in non-COVID times, because of the non-compliance, because of prioritization, because of so many other things, financial issues, or they don't really understand the importance of repeated follow-ups. I think this has given a very, a justifiable reason for otherwise, this kind of mentality. So many a times I told you, we can't blame the patients or the parents many a times. So we need to, as he said, as Dr. Love has very clearly told, these are the problems. When you delay a process, even pre or post surgery, it is going to really come out in much more bigger problem for us. And the kind of insult or the sight-threatening potential of this delay is much more than in adults. That is the whole problem.
Thank you.
But
Dr.
very well
Pankaj, Dr. Pankaj, you would like to share your thoughts?
No, Dr. Love, yeah, Dr. Love has already covered a lot of things, all these things. And this is going to be a major problem in the kids. And since it's like lockdown has become very long now, in between it was open, but a lot of people were scared to come. So amblyopia is going to be a major problem in future. See, surgery sometimes we can manage okay after some time, but amblyopia, the amount of amblyopia, what they are going to get, and the treatment of amblyopia, it's a major problem. Even a lot of people, they have not come for the follow-up and they stop doing patching also. So now they are coming, and then we have to restart the patching, and they are like, whatsoever the improvement was there, it's gone. So this is what the main problem is there, and a lot of online screen and all this level, he takes care of a lot of patients, kids. So all these problems are going to be going to be more in future.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Love, for that nice presentation. We'll move on to the next presentation by Dr. Vikram Jain from Mangalore, who will be speaking on unforeseen complications in hypermature cataract. This is something all of us will be encountering in the coming days.
Thank you, Dr. Satyajit. I'm just starting to share my screen. Yes. Unforeseen complications due to COVID. Hypermature cataracts itself have come in huge numbers. Hypermature cataract itself is the diagnosis itself is a complication which has come due to this COVID. We are seeing this in much more numbers than we've seen it earlier. Because of our lockdowns, all the electives were shut down and we could not plan. Nobody knew what was happening. All essential services were shut down. All ophthalmology services, elective surgeries at that time for the first few months, none of us were operating either. As per NPCB data, more than 5 lakh of surgeries, cataract surgeries done per month. So in the next 3 months of the initial lockdown, at least 15 to 17 lakh of surgeries would have been the backlog. As previously discussed in the same IC, there was a lot of apprehension by the patients and by us, the surgeons also. Ultimately, some surgeons went on to the extent of proving that there was no aerosol generated in a cataract surgery. However, for the patients, it was a huge economic impact. There was no paying capacity because there was no income for them, no public transport like Dr. KP has already mentioned. And also for the lower economic strata, there were no camps being conducted because we didn't want large number of people gathering. Hence, there was always going to be a delay in these in the cataracts. We started seeing hypermature cataracts, neovascular glaucoma with cataracts, as well as brown dense cataracts. This was highlighted by all media also that ophthalmology services have taken a big hit. Our last month's IJ also had this cover image saying a long wait due to COVID. Ultimately, we did start the camps. This is how we started the camps for the lower socioeconomic strata with proper social distancing. We made sure that everyone was wearing a mask. Our doctors and our other staff were also adequately protected to the extent possible. In the camps, like Dr. Satyajit already mentioned, we did a rationing. Mature cataracts were given preference. Patients with other ocular diseases, glaucoma and diabetic retinopathy, were also given preference. Finally, we go on to the OT scene. It's like any other hypermature cataract, nothing special about it, but we got these variety of cases. This is a video from my friend Dr. Naveen from Bangalore. This patient with a past keratoplasty, hypermature cataract there with a lot of synechiae, quite a difficult surgery, well managed by Dr. Naveen. Also one more phacolytic glaucoma, fortunately presented early, and therefore as soon as we see once we enter the AC, everything gets clear and the good SICS could be performed. Now, we have few other surgeries. Again, like any hypermature cataract, my main fear in a hypermature cataract is the Argentinian flag sign. Without a good rhexis, there is no support for a sulcus implantation. And if I have an Argentinian flag in OT, that's the time when I start sweating. That is my most terrified thing. The most thing I'm terrified about is an Argentinian flag sign. Sometimes, yes, we do manage to nicely nick it and draw another rhexis all over it, and then complete a phaco and then in the bag IOL implantation itself. But we all know that we never know when the posterior extension can be there, when we'll be able to put an IOL in the sulcus or not. Here, as previously discussed, a small rhexis is being done and then it's being spiraled out. I think I'll just skip this because this is what all of us are doing. And we are doing many more numbers of these days because of the mature and hypermature cataracts that we've seen who were delayed because of the COVID. One more thing is phacomorphic glaucoma, Dr. KP has already mentioned. Other problems are endothelial cell loss because of the glaucoma as well as the inflammation, and not everyone could be done under peribulbar, under topical, and hence some complications might have arisen because of the peribulbar block. Some of us had forgotten how to give the peribulbar blocks in the age of topical phaco. We have also been seeing some patients coming back with aphakia from various centers because of their hypermaturity. Probably, I'm assuming it's because of their probability. So this will be one more thing we have to start doing, much more SFIOL or retrofixated IOLs. In literature, there has been a talk about immediate sequential bilateral cataract surgery as a response to the COVID pandemic, so that for patients this entails fewer visits. Therefore, they are not exposed to other patients and henceforth. But however, I don't think this is a good thing in our Indian scenario at least. So thank you, Dr. Satyajit. I've tried to cover what happened in the pandemic. Hypermature cataracts per se in COVID, the numbers are much more, and it's like any other hypermature cataract. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vikram, for that beautiful presentation. Dr. Ashu, you have your video with you? You're muted.
Satyajit, I'll try to show only one video, not on three or four, in the interest of time. Okay. Okay.
Dr. Love, you also wanted to show one video.
Can you see this video?
That's okay.
Right now, we can't see your video.
Okay, wait a sec.
We have time.
Some disturbances there.
Okay. My presentation was more of an overview, which I have given in the beginning only.
Okay, so I'll be...
Satyajit, my time also.
Can I start, Satyajit?
Yes, please.
So
can you share your screen?
Yeah, I'm sharing it, I think.
No, you're not.
Okay, 1 second. Share. Okay.
Now it is.
Okay, is this visible now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll show two videos. Okay. So basically, this is a very old clip, again done on VHS, recorded, showing a combination of iris hooks. At that time, there were no capsule hooks around, along with the endocapsular ring. Now, what I wanted to say was that these are the this is just the ECR endocapsular ring. One wouldn't have dared to do such surgery these days, but at that time, this was the only thing available. And somehow it worked well. This is the endocapsular ring that injector that we had designed, and it's still available and works very well. And so the idea of showing this video is that to basically to highlight the fact that in younger people, traumatic cataracts, although there may be a delay, but the remaining zonules are sufficiently strong to support this surgery. And people who may not have access to device or may not be very comfortable with the more cumbersome Sionis or technically more demanding capsule tension segments, can even do with the endocapsular ring and at least save the day. So this is the, at that time, this was a non-paying patient, PMMA being implanted. And this is the surgery at the end, and this is at the end of the surgery. So now I'll show you one surgery. This is essentially capsule capsule segment. This was probably the first segment, indigenous capsule segment done in India. I did the first surgery. And there was a small subluxation. One could possibly have got away with an endocapsular ring, but decided to do a CTS because it would be more stable. And also, so basically there's a rail reading being done. The first one has been done. The second one is being done. Now, if you notice, I make a scleral, I don't make a Hoffman pocket, I make a scleral tunnel. It's something which we are so used to. We all started our phaco's with scleral tunnels. And this is still about this area, and then the needle goes in. So the advantage is that the knot gets buried itself. Then the suture had been threaded, the tenoflurane had been threaded through the eyelet of the capsule, through the hook of the capsule segment. Now, this was the first surgery that I did. You can see I'm struggling a bit here. The arc length is more than the rhexis edge, rhexis diameter. So gradually I realized that I'll have to do it one by one. You just won't go in like an intraocular lens in one go. Is it visible now? Okay. So this is the segment being guided in gently. Okay, it's being guided in gently. The suture is being pulled simultaneously. And you can see, then we suture it here with just a slight tug on the rhexis edge. It should not be too much of a tug. And you see the knot will get buried itself once we cut the suture. The intraocular lens is being implanted. Irrigation aspiration done, and this is the surgery at the end of the eye at the end of the surgery. Post-op day one picture, dilated picture. You can see this little tug here and the hook over here pulling onto the rhexis edge. This is a second surgery which shows a combined use of capsule hooks along with capsule segments was done. there'll be 3 segments that I'll use. This was about 3 clock hours, the overall basins. Phaco is done in the usual manner. It was a soft cataract, nothing eventful, fortunately went off well. The AC is formed well, and we withdraw. The usual precautions are done of a subluxated cataract. Irrigation aspiration has been done. Then the central one is removed to facilitate further surgery. Removal is very easy. You just gently pull it out, loosen the hook, and then just pull it out. It's a very flexible material, comes out very easily. These are nylon ones. These are the capsule segments, the indigenous segments that I use. Although IKEHAMA they're designed, but these work very well compared to the original ones also. So the suture is threaded through the eyelet. In the usual manner, the capsule segment is guided in and into the bag. The suture is pulled so as to bring it into position and tied.
Thank you, Dr. Ashu, for the beautiful videos.
Thank you, Satyajit.
Thank you so much. Dr. Love, you have a video?
Show that.
Dr. Love, you can share your screen.
Yeah. Is visible? Is it visible?
Yeah.
Yes.
So since we have exactly about 10 minutes time, so I'll run you through an interesting video which covers different scenarios of traumatic cataract in children. And as you can see here, this is a pre-existing anterior capsular defect, and this is a penetrating trauma. There is a corneal wound, but the patient presented to us late, so the corneal wound is almost self-sealing. And that's why we didn't suture the cornea first. We did cortical aspiration, and now you have an anterior capsular opening which needs to be trimmed. And as you can see, as I had presented earlier also, this cutter becomes very handy in doing anterior capsulorhexis and even posterior capsulorhexis, especially in traumatic cataracts. After it was done, the lens is implanted in the bag, but since it was a recent wound, by this time the cornea gave up at one point, the corneal injury. So the lens was implanted in the bag, and one suture was given at the leaking point. That was enough for the corneal wound. After that, the eye became firm even on hydration. So we did not need to give another one for this. And the main port is generally sutured in children. And after that, posterior capsulorhexis is done, because in children, the visual axis opacification will be very fast if you do not do a posterior capsulorhexis. And a cutter is used to do the same. Now this, I think I've already shown to you, so I'll skip this one. And pediatric traumatic cataract is very fascinating, because again, when all of us do a lot of adult cataract surgeries, and most of them are at subcortical level, we don't have to think much, and we are keep on operating. But in traumatic cataracts, for every case, you have to think and plan. And this is the third case in which you should always suspect if there is a small corneal injury. And as you can see at this point, you should always suspect a foreign body. And in this case, as we started doing the cortical aspiration, got hold of a foreign body, and this foreign body is removed from the main port. And after that, the now the planning in this time is different. This time we are not doing a vitrector assisted anterior capsulotomy. We just made a nick and enlarged the anterior capsular excess. And then the cortical aspiration has been done. And now you can see the entry wound very clearly from where the foreign body had gone. So again, IOL insertion. And as you can see, most of these cases, we have been able to successfully implant the IOL in the bag. Next is traumatic cataract with a dense posterior synechia. And now once you release the posterior synechia, you realize that there is again a fibrosed anterior capsular thickening. And these are very common scenarios in traumatic cataract in children. For good visualization, iris hooks were used, and now you initiate the capsular excess. And always keep it at the back of the mind that you have to aim for in the bag implantation. Then our decision making will be much better. And as you can see, through a small opening of the anterior capsule, we did the cortical aspiration, but the opening is not big enough for IOL implantation. And again, these fibrosed area have to be removed to prevent future complications. So the bag was trimmed and enlarged. And using the cutter itself, you get a good size anterior capsular excess, and the IOL is implanted in the bag. Again, this is going by the fibrosis of the anterior capsule. This is again an old injury, and the cutter is used, and even the posterior capsule is fibrosed, if you can see. And using a 23 gauge cutter, you can do a good posterior capsular excess. And finally, at the end of it, the results are very gratifying. The main port is generally sutured, and the pre-op and post-op picture of the same. Another presentation, what we can have in blunt trauma is pre-existing PC defect. And with experience, and when you see this total cataract, you can easily see the posterior capsule and the fibrosed margin of the posterior capsular opening. So in that cases, just skip the hydro procedures, do a cortical aspiration, because we don't want the cortex to fall back in the vitreous cavity. And then the vitreous prolapse in the anterior chamber has to be dealt with by vitrectomy. And even in these cases with large PC defect, it is possible to implant the IOL in the bag. But in this case, as you can see, the IOL has been placed in the sulcus and with optic capture. And then if you are able to capture the optic and in the anterior capsular excess also, for long term, it will be a very well-centered IOL. Another common presentation is subluxation of the lens in traumatic cataracts. So as you can see here, and good thing about traumatic subluxation is that they are not progressive. And as a pediatric ophthalmologist, we deal with a lot of progressive subluxation also, as in Marfan syndrome. So in that, the plan may be a bit different from what we do in this, because in those cases, scleral fixation is very important. Another important thing here you notice is the anterior chamber has vitreous. As soon as you notice vitreous in the anterior chamber, just give up the cortical aspiration at that point, and whatever has to be done is to be done with cutter, because then that will avoid traction on the retina. And once that was done, then CTR is implanted in the bag. And IOL implantation. Though this is not a very well-centered IOL, but again, in these cases, better to avoid aspheric IOLs and go for biconvex, so that decentration doesn't increase the aberrations. And once this is done, and cutter is used to remove the vitreous from the subluxated part. But in this, even the iris sphincters were injured, and the end of it, you have a fairly centered IOL, and the visual axis is quite clear. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Satyajit.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Love. Some final tips on the complications that we will be facing by Dr. Pankaj. Some parting message you want to give to the audience?
It's beautifully managed the things. And basically, main thing is planning is very important. When you are doing these kind of complicated surgeries, you have to plan which way you have to go. Because what happens when we start the surgery and then we start thinking, yes, you have a CTR, whether you have a segments and all. But nowadays, like Dr. Ashu has showed, segments are very good. In these subluxated, where Dr. Love, one case was there, it was almost almost 50% subluxation was there. In that case, if we can put the with the segment, probably that will be much better choice. But nowadays, somehow, I don't know, because I started doing SFIL almost 20 years back. I'm a bit skeptical about fixing with 90-10 proline, because I am seeing a lot of patients where we did the SFIL with the 10 proline, and now everything is coming down. Like I have seen the IOLs in the vitreous cavity. So now we have to take out and put. So nowadays, somehow I am more comfortable with putting the iris claw lens. I don't know, it's too early to say, but we have moved from SFIL to iris claw lens in last 2-3 years, I would say. And most of the cases, we are putting iris claw lens, and we have a very good result as of now. It's too early to say, but since SFIL I started in 2000, so 21 years back, I had a lot of patients with the lens in the vitreous cavity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Dr. Arun, you want to share something? Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I would agree with Dr. Pankaj. We have also for last 2 years, we have shifted to retrofixation of the iris claw lens, doing fixation of iris claw in the posterior chamber. And it's giving us very good result, but it's too early to say anything. Yes, I also share the same thing that patients which we operated 10-15 years back with the scleral fixation, now the suture is melting away and there's a subluxation, even dislocation of the scleral fixated IOL in the vitreous. One more thing I would like to add is whenever I'm operating a pediatric case, I always tell the parents that the surgery is the beginning of the treatment. It's not the end of the treatment. So the real treatment is after the surgery. You have to do the amblyopia treatment. You have to counsel the parents very well before the surgery about the post-operative management of the amblyopia and the use of glasses and everything. Whether you're making a patient aphakic or you're making a patient pseudophakic, whether it's a unilateral cataract or a bilateral cataract. So I think counseling is very, very important, the parents' counseling.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Dr.
Ashu Agarwal, you want to share something?
Yeah, I'll just quickly respond to Dr. Pankaj's observation. And I agree, but Dr. Pankaj, you have to see it in this way that you've given the patient a good 15 to 20 years of vision. Okay. And the other aspect is that we were using tenoproline. Recommended now is Ninoproline or Gore-Tex or one of those sutures. Because we didn't have anything, we made do. Like you saw that surgery I showed, we didn't have anything, just an endocapsular ring, and it was considered cutting edge in 2000. And remember, Sasha Satyajit, seeing this video, I told him, I presented AIOS and told him, click my pictures. And he forgot, and he tells Pooja, oh, hum to bhul gaya karna, hum to video dekh ke reh gaye. So, mantra-mugdh hoke dekh raha tha. You know, so we've given a good 15 to 20 years. The other thing about retrofixation, iris fixation is that, you see, we have 2, 3, 4 years of results till now, but 15 years, I mean, we're talking again, compare 15 years, because there's going to be iris atrophy at that point of fixation, and it's likely to give way there also. So I think, and plus, so in terms of scleral fixation, but what I was talking about was fixing the segment, which is a much lighter element than a lens. So, and 1-point fixation is there. So I think there's nothing perfect, but yes, it'll evolve. And let's see how it goes. It will be interesting.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of this session. I would like to thank Dr. Pankaj Rupalia, Dr. Arun Shatrupal, Dr. Krishna Prasad, Dr. Ashu Agarwal, Dr. Love, and Dr. Vikram Jain for sharing their beautiful insights into managing all these complications. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Satyajit, for having us here.
Thank you all speakers, and thank you, Chairman, for handling this very well. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Take care. See you guys.
With this, we wrap up in Braille Hall and see you tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Satyajit.